I've been doing a lot of debunking of weird crap I see on social media lately, but I still am obsessed with true crime. And one of the most recent ones that I just can't wrap my head around is the murder of Richard Oland. Richard Oland came from one of Canada's elite old money families, the Moosehead Brewery family. Yeah. So this brewery had been in his family for 6 generations by the time he started his career there. By 1980, he'd worked his way up to vice president of the brewery. His brother Derek was executive vice president. When their father P.W. Oland selected Derek as his successor and named him president of Moosehead Brewery, Richard left the company. After leaving Moosehead, Richard started some companies of his own, including several trucking companies and an investment firm. He accumulated a net worth of over $35 million. His investment firm, Far End Corporation, was located on the second floor of the building owned by John Ainsworth, at 52 Canterbury Street, St. John, New Brunswick. And this was where Richard had his personal office. On the morning of July 6, 2011, Richard left for his office for a 10 a.m. appointment with 2 insurance brokers. Richard also had a meeting that day with his financial manager, Robert McFadden, about setting up a trust fund for Richard's heirs. Robert was going to set up the trust fund for Richard's heirs. McFadden left the office around 5:30 p.m., and Richard's personal assistant, Maureen Adamson, left at 5:45. Richard's son, Dennis, came to the office to drop off some books as Maureen was leaving, and he greeted her in a friendly manner. Richard did not return home that night, which his wife, Connie, reported was not uncommon. When she came to work on the morning of July 7th, Maureen Adamson found Richard face down in a pool of blood in his office at Far End Corporation. Sergeant Mark Smith described the scene as one of the bloodiest crime scenes of his career. There was so much blood that it dripped through the carpet into the office ceiling of the office downstairs from his. It's a lot of blood. The autopsy showed 45 separate wounds across Richard's hand, neck, and head. His injuries included 14 fractures to the skull. Some injuries are made with a sharp edge, and others are made with a blunt object, likely indicating a weapon with 2 different edges or 2 different weapons. Toxicology reports show that Richard had alcohol in his system, even though both Maureen Adamson and Robert McFadden insisted he never kept alcohol at his office and that he had not left his office all day. Police brought Richard's family in for interviews after notifying them of his death. Richard's son Dennis was interviewed separately. When asked what he was wearing the day before, he replied, "These pants, these shoes, a blue dress shirt, and a navy blazer." 2.5 hours into his interview, Constable Stephen Davidson told Dennis he was their primary suspect in his father's murder. At this point, Dennis called the family attorney, Bill Teed, who told Dennis to stop talking to the police. The police allowed Dennis to leave the station without attempting to collect the clothing he'd been wearing at the time of the crime. In spite of a thorough examination of all of Richard's wounds and beneath his fingernails, no viable DNA evidence was found other than his own DNA. No weapons are found at the crime scene. 1 bloody footprint was left in the office, but police never found a match to it. Police did a thorough search of Dennis's car, of every pair of shoes he owned. They searched his cell phone and the bag that he brought books to his father's office in, but they didn't find any blood or traces of his father's DNA on any of them. Video surveillance of Dennis and his wife shopping the evening of July 6th showed Dennis wearing a brown Hugo Boss jacket, not the navy blazer he mentioned in his interview, which police found suspicious. But I can barely remember what I did this morning, and my dad didn't just get bludgeoned to death, so you know what? I think it's reasonable that he might have forgotten what jacket he was wearing. They brought in the brown jacket and inspected it. Constable David McDonald found 5 tiny stains on the jacket. And I looked at the pictures of these stains, magnified 500 times. They were like the size of a dime. These were tiny, like microscopic tiny. I don't know how he found them. 4 of these stains came back positive as blood, matching Richard's DNA. In November 2013, St. John police charged Dennis with second-degree murder, to which Dennis pleaded not guilty. At a preliminary hearing, Provincial Court Judge Ronald LeBlanc heard the prosecution's evidence to see if they had enough to go to trial. Crown Prosecutor John Henheffer's theory was that Dennis asked his father for money, and when Richard refused, Dennis killed him. After going through a divorce, Dennis was having cash flow problems, and Richard had loaned him over $500,000 to help cover his expenses, his mortgage, the divorce expenses, etc. The Crown also suggested Dennis was angry with his father about an affair he was having. and Dennis was the last person known to see his father alive. Cell phone records showed that Richard's phone pinged off a cell tower at 6:45 on July 6th, near where Dennis said he stopped after taking the books to his father. While LeBlanc thought the police were too hasty in pinning Dennis as their primary suspect, the blood on his jacket, combined with opportunity to commit the murder, was enough to go to trial. The trial began September 16th, 2015. Dennis was found guilty and sentenced to 10 years to life. He appealed, and his conviction was overturned due to an error in the judge's instructions to the jury. At the second trial, Dennis opted to be tried by a judge only when he was found not guilty. Justice Terrence Morrison released a 146-page document explaining why he found Dennis not guilty. He said that the motive wasn't enough. Dennis and Richard didn't get along well, but their relationship wasn't outside the normal range of family strains. And while Dennis had made a comment to the financial manager Robert McFadden, saying he should tell his father to be more discreet about the affair, McFadden testified that Dennis had never seemed angry about it. The judge, Justice Morrison, didn't believe that Richard would have refused to help Dennis with his financial trouble, because he'd never refused him in the past. I mean, he'd already given him more than $500,000. That he's pretty willing to help him. And evidence showed that Richard was just going to deduct all the money he'd given Dennis from his inheritance. I mean, the guy's worth more than $35 million. $500,000 isn't that much of it. And because the evidence was all circumstantial, it wasn't really enough to say that he did it beyond all reasonable doubt. Even though blood on Dennis's jacket could be explained away, the personal assistant, what was her name again? Maureen Adamson, said that Richard had a skin condition that made his scalp bleed easily. So the droplets of blood could have gotten on Dennis's jacket just from being around his dad. And then there's the police work. A lot of the evidence that the police collected wasn't admissible in court. Standard procedures to avoid crime scene contamination were not followed. Police used the office bathroom for 2 days before the forensics team arrived to check it for evidence. When the forensics team arrived, they found a used paper towel in the trash can with blood on it and traces of blood in the sink. But because officers had been using the bathroom that whole time, it was impossible to tell when the blood had gotten there. Police came in and out of the crime scene without gloves on for a week before anyone looked for fingerprints, and the bloody footprint that was found in the office might have been made by one of the police officers stepping in blood and then stepping on the carpet. The blood spatter expert didn't arrive until 4 days after the homicide, by which point the body had been removed and the blood was dry and started to flake off the walls. And some witnesses were not interviewed until 1.5 years after Richard's death. The door to the back alley behind the building wasn't photographed until July 23rd, 2015, 4 years after Richard's death. And this was the escape route that they assumed the murderer took, because the other way they would have had to go down 2 flights of stairs, all covered in blood. But the door out to the back alley, because the building was on a hill, was at ground level, going out from the 2nd floor. But they didn't take a picture of it. They didn't do anything. When asked about this, the forensics officer said he overlooked it. It was always in the plan to do that at some point, but it wasn't completed, he testified in court. And a lot of the evidence had to be excluded because the applications for search warrants were made under false pretenses, and some things were just seized without a warrant. St. John Police Force is currently under investigation by the provincial police for corruption and a potential cover-up in this case. So who really killed Richard Oland? Who knows? But not Dennis, say the courts. At least the second time around. But yeah, this is one of those murders that's just like weird. Because it's just, who did it? Why? How? How did no one see, like, 45 times to the head? Like, holy crap, what did this guy do to you? But yeah. Anyways, sources for this video were CBC, the Canadian Broadcasting Company, Global News, and Wikipedia. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. If you did, please hit the thumbs up and the subscribe buttons. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!